I am pretty confident in saying that over the years, I have never delivered a fire and brimstone sermon. Don't worry, I'm not going to today either. A fire and brimstone sermon is basically when the preacher raises his voice, all but shouts at the people, condemning them for all of the things they are doing wrong, with the threat of eternal fire and the brimstone coming down from heaven. And I suspect the main reason I've never done this is because it doesn't work. Fear is a motivator, but it's a very short-term motivator. And it might cause somebody to change their actions for a day or so. But then you have to double down and provide even more fear the next time and more on top of that. So I don't do it. In a similar way, I do but rarely do give moralistic homilies. And a moralistic homily is basically where we lay out all the moral failings of people and ask people to examine their conscience and change. And I don't do that too often because of two reasons. One is I have found it's more powerful than condemning the vices is to show the inspiration of the virtue. That's something that pulls us on. The other reason I have chosen not to give that homily very frequently is because even the ones who listen with great intensity, and then perhaps they apply it to their own lives, are quick to start to apply it to all the people around them. Like, oh yes, I know such and such person. And I remember not long after I was ordained a priest, I gave a homily like this. And I said, this is our problem. I'm not talking to the people out there. This is something all of us have to deal with. This is for each one of us. And I was rather persistent at saying that. And after Mass, when I was standing near the door and people were leaving, a woman came up to me and she said, Father, that was a really good homily. Too bad my sister wasn't here to hear it because she really needs that. And I felt defeated. With all that in mind, however, and admitting that I'm probably on thin ice today, I'm going to talk about the unclean spirit. The unclean spirits that come upon people who come into a church. Now, obviously, I don't mean literally just a church building, but people of faith, people of spirituality, people who not only have a membership in a religion or a denomination, but actually try to practice it. I've discovered there are particular temptations for them. It's like the unclean spirit in the synagogue. If you think about this particular gospel reading I just did, it's very fascinating. A synagogue was a small house of prayer. They were not big. They were sort of like neighborhood places. So Jesus goes in, and the tradition is that they would hand somebody the scroll, one of the prophets maybe. The person would read it and then give a little teaching. But the teaching was normally based on what rabbis through the centuries had said. So they would quote from other people. Jesus obviously did the teaching not like the scribes who would quote others that they had read, but from his own heart. He spoke with authority. But then, there was the man with the unclean spirit. In Mark's gospel, he draws a dichotomy between clean, which means holy, and unclean, which means unholy. And the synagogue itself was a holy place. So for a man with an unclean spirit to be in the synagogue was a complete contradiction. So here we are in a holy place, unfortunately, likely allowing some unholy spirits to permeate our own lives. And I was really trying to pray over and think about what are these unholy spirits that seem to afflict people who want to be good. And I came up with 3 broad strokes. The number one is the unholy, the unclean spirit of pride. How easily people who try to be good fall into the trap of pride. And it's funny because it sort of disguises itself. Like, look, yeah, I'm doing some good things, but pretty soon we think, well, I'm doing good things, with the emphasis on the word I. Pride leads to self-righteousness. It leads to a judgmental attitude, and certainly it leads to criticism. What we have to do as people who are trying to follow the Lord is we have to be humble. Humble of spirit, humble of heart. And I love the thing that we do in the Catholic Church as a tradition. It's incredibly beautiful. You enter a church, you genuflect, come into the pew, and before anything else, you kneel down. Because kneeling is that posture of humility. We kneel before the Lord and saying, Lord, we need you. We don't want the unclean spirit of pride. The second unclean spirit is hypocrisy. Now, we've all heard that, people love to be critical of churchgoers because they're all hypocritical. They act so holy on Sunday, and we know what they're doing the rest of the week. Unfortunately, there may be truth to that. But let's also admit we are sinners, so we don't always live up to our own standards. But when I'm talking about hypocrisy, I'm talking about the ones who don't even try to live up to their own standards, where we have words, but we don't follow through with actions or behavior. And sometimes we think the words, as beautiful as they are, and the wonderful songs and the inspiring moments are sufficient. The unclean spirit says, yeah, accept that, that's okay. But in reality, it's not okay. We have to also look at how we live and behave. I was corresponding once with a man who was in prison. And the man who was in prison had been a rather upright citizen of that particular town. He was well respected. He was a churchgoer, and people found him very good in so many ways. But while this was going on, and over a period of time, he was doing some really outlandish things. I mean, we're talking bad. And that got him arrested, and he did a lot of time. So I was corresponding with him, and I asked him the question, how could you live a double life? I said, I don't understand. Didn't it rip you apart? You were this way, but you were this way. Frankly, he never answered it, and I still don't know the answer how we can do that. But that is a great temptation. And maybe we're not at that extreme, and maybe hopefully we're not going to get arrested or doing crimes. But sometimes if we stand honestly before the Lord, are we consistent? Are we consistent? And the third, and I'm only giving three, the third unclean spirit that comes in so readily for church-going people, for good people, for prayerful people, the unclean spirit that wants to sneak in is complacency. In other words, yep, we accept what we have. And we don't realize we're called to go beyond. We allow limits upon ourselves. We don't develop into the persons we could be. We accept, yeah, I'm okay. What more is there to do? What a temptation that can be. Now, these three can be divided into subcategories for sure. These are the unholy spirits that want to seek and come in. Now, in the gospel, the man with the unclean spirit was in a holy place. But the line I like most is when the spirit cries out, "What have you to do with us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." And when we're in the presence of the Holy One of God, what is unholy just can't handle it. It's sort of like we can have all the snow on the ground, but once the bright and warm sun comes, the sun will melt it away. We have to believe. And if we continue to be in the Lord's presence, we have to trust that the goodness will get rid of it. So we admit, first of all, that we are victims of temptation. But we also acknowledge that the power of grace is greater, so that we don't give in to the unclean spirits. And this is a message. This is a message, not just for the people out there or for our sisters or our brothers, the ones who really need to hear it. This is a message for us.